Welcome back to Colonial America. This is Lesson 2, the New England Colonies. Today we'll be looking at Topic 1, Seeking Religious Freedom. The second topic will be Topic 2, the New Colonies. Related vocabulary terms for this lesson are the following. Dissent is to disagree with or oppose an opinion. Persecute is to mistreat a person or group on the basis of their beliefs. And tolerance is the ability to accept or put up with different views or behaviors. We'll see these terms as we go through the reading. Once again, in this lesson, we're going to do a quick before reading scan. And looking at this lesson, there seems to be a lot going on here. In the first part, we have Seeking Religious Freedom. The Pilgrims settled Plymouth, the Mayflower Compact, and Native American help are subtopics under Seeking Religious Freedom. And we'll be dealing with this section first. Okay, on page 65, we'll also see a picture of the Mayflower, and it's a pretty interesting picture. It's a nice cutaway of what the inside of the ship looked like. In the second half, we'll be looking at New Colonies. New Colonies begins on page 66, and there are only two subtopics for this section, Connecticut and Rhode Island, and conflict with Native Americans, and we'll get to that one later. So that's a quick before reading scan of this lesson. Once again, we'll be applying during reading strategies, making connections by relating information that I already know about the subject to what I'm reading, by comparing my experiences with what I'm reading. We'll be interacting with the text as we go along by identifying the main idea and supporting details and asking questions. By identifying how the text is organized, cause and effect, compare contrast, problem solution, question answer, and sequence of events. And finally, through clarifying understanding using photographs, charts, and other graphics to help me understand what I'm reading, or by deciding whether the information I'm reading is fact or opinion. Those are our during reading strategies, and we'll also have some after reading strategies. We'll recall by summarizing the selection in writing, by using headings to question yourself about what you've read. We'll respond, and I did modify this a little bit because we're going to be drawing logical conclusions about the topic and forming opinions about what you've read by using guiding questions and wrap-up questions for each section. The guiding question for the first section here is, why did the Puritans settle in North America? And as we wrap this one up with analysis, what was the significance of the Mayflower Compact? So we'll answer those questions at the end of section 1. We'll evaluate by searching the selection to determine how the author used evidence to reach conclusions by forming a judgment about whether the selection was objective or biased. Again, we tend to use this for document analysis other than textbook reading. But at the end here with evaluate, you can put in your own personal opinions or personal ideas about things. And you'll notice in the last section I did that. I kind of judged the text. I mean, how good was it at explaining things? You can also evaluate by coming up with some of your own observations at the end as well. And I highly recommend doing that on your own. You certainly don't have to use my recommendations. They're just there as guides. But if you come up with something else, that would be impressive. Okay, so let's move on into the actual reading. And again, I'm on page 64. This is the first topic here, Seeking Religious Freedom under the New England Colonies. And we'll get right into it. Let's get to those first paragraphs. Okay, why did the Puritans settle in North America? Where am I getting that from? You'll see that's the guiding question. If you were to turn to page 66, you'll see this question about the middle of the page under progress check. Oh, go back one. There we go. What was the significance of the Mayflower Compact? Okay, so those are the two questions I'll answer at the end when we respond. What about this one, which I just put up a minute ago? How do new ideas change the way people live? That actually is the essential question for the unit. And I'll try to address that as we go along. So we're going to mention that later on. Okay, let's get into the reading now. Okay. The Jamestown settlers had come to America in search of wealth. The next wave of English colonists arrived in search of religious freedom. That's interesting. England had been a Protestant country since 1534, when the King, Henry VIII, broke away from the Roman Catholic Church and formed the Anglican Church. Not everyone in England was happy with the new church. Many people dissented. disagreeing with Anglican beliefs or practices. Some English people remained Catholic. Others were Protestant who wanted to reform the Anglican Church. Still others wanted to break away from it altogether. The Protestants who wished to reform the Anglican Church were called Puritans. Those who sought to set up their own churches were known as separatists. The separatists were persecuted, mistreated because of their beliefs in England. Some fled to the Netherlands. There they found freedom to practice their religion, but they had difficulty finding work. They also worried that their children were losing their religious values and their English way of life. There's a lot to unpack here, is there not? I remember from school how our teachers explained the motivations people had to settle in the Americas, and it often came down to three things: gold, God, and glory. Now, for those of you who know the Spanish conquistadors, you know the glory part. When we talk about Cortez or Pizarro, the conquest of the American empires was a big deal for them, and that brought them glory. There was also gold involved in that because both Cortez and Pizarro would get rich mining gold. I mean, that great wealth. We know in Jamestown they sought gold. It was something they were looking for there. So again, things I already know about this, I'm applying here. This is different. This is about practicing religion. This is God. The idea of coming to the Americas to worship as you please, to practice your religion without being persecuted by others, was a big deal. It's another one of those, we talked about freedom and opportunity and participation in government with Jamestown. Now let's add to that the right to practice your religion as you wish. This was an idea that comes to the Americans, to the Americas here. Henry VIII broke away from the church, and many disagreed with this division, right? Some in England stayed Catholics. They wanted to keep their religion, and they would be persecuted as well, I should point out. Others wanted to reform the church, make it even better than it used to be. They wanted to make it pure. Puritans, that's where the term comes from. And the ones that wanted to break away completely, they want nothing to do with the Church of England. They wanted to separate. Separatists. So I just wanted to break down who all these people are as we move along. What happens in the Netherlands? I do have a picture here before we move on. The Pilgrims were not very happy in the Netherlands. It was hard for them to find jobs, for one. For two, the Netherlands is a very tolerant society with many different religions. And the separatists didn't like the idea that their children were being influenced by others with different ideas, strange, which they considered alien ideas. They didn't want to stay in the Netherlands. They were afraid they would lose their identity. I just wanted to point that out before we moved along. And let's move along because we are in the Pilgrims settle Plymouth. So I'm on page 65. In 1620, a group of separatists decided to move to America. They became known as the Pilgrims. A pilgrim is someone who undertakes a religious journey. The Pilgrims were able to get grants of land from the Virginia Company. Aha, we've talked about them before. They got permission to settle Virginia and to practice their religion freely. They boarded a ship called the Mayflower and left to begin new lives. The Mayflower drifted off course on its journey across the Atlantic. The first land the Pilgrims sighted was Cape Cod, well north of their target. It was November, and winter was fast approaching. The colonists decided to drop anchor in Cape Cod Bay. They went ashore on a cold, bleak day in December at a place they called Plymouth. So, new ideas about religion led some to seek places to freely practice their beliefs without persecution in America. So, mention this in the last slide. Okay, this idea of practicing your religion as you wish. We'll come back to that. That's a big deal. Okay, so the Pilgrims were not supposed to land at Cape Cod. They were supposed to land in Virginia. Okay, that's something we have to keep in mind here, right? I mean, something got missed here. What happened? And I have a little clarification on here. I love the map on page 65. Okay, it shows you how difficult life was for the 102 passengers on the Mayflower. I mean, look at that ship, right? Most of the crew slept in tiny cabins in what's called the forecastle, which served as the ship's kitchen as well. I mean, so these people are cramped on this thing. And you can even see pictures of people on the ship. You can imagine how this was. right? The Mayflower was a supply ship, not a passenger ship. Between decks, there were passengers of the Mayflower who slept and kept their belongings. And sometimes the spaces on these ships are very cramped. Again, this was a supply ship, so it wasn't meant to carry people. It's not a passenger vessel. The main hold held most of the ship's supplies and tools. You see that's way below. Okay, the helmsman moved the lever called the whipstaff, which moved the rudder, steered the ship. It gives you a great idea of what the ship was like, and it was tight. I mean, they wanted to get off the ship when they got to the Americas. They did not want to stay on it. Okay, it was tight on the ship. But I do love that picture on 65. It is fantastic. So, hey, what went wrong here? I got a picture of the Mayflower here in Cape Cod Bay. Yeah, they did have a first landing in November 11th. In the Corn Hill, they have an encounter with Native Americans way out on the Cape, on Cape Cod. Eventually, they're going to establish Plymouth as their settlement, and basically, there's your route, right? There's the plan. There's the actual route. Now, keep in mind when they're crossing, we know this is hurricane season, right? It's in the autumn and the end or the beginning of winter. So this is also hurricane season. Was there a hurricane? Was there a storm that possibly blew them off course? Absolutely possible during this time of year. Ever get lost and end up somewhere unexpected, but still interesting? Yeah, it's kind of the situation that the Pilgrims were dealing with when they came to the Americas. So, hey, we are already on page 66. So we're going through this reading pretty quick. Plymouth was outside the territory of the Virginia Company and its laws. While they were still on board ship, the Pilgrims signed a document they called the Mayflower Compact. This document set up an organized, orderly government. Each signer promised to obey the laws passed for the general good of the colony. The Mayflower Compact was a key step in the development of representative, democratic government in America. Well, we've heard this before, haven't we? Okay. Hey, whenever you play a new game, form a new club, have a new group, you eventually need rules and procedures to guide everyone. Now, they were supposed to come to the Americas under the Virginia Charter with the Virginia Company. They don't land in Virginia. So even before they leave the ship, they come up with the Mayflower Compact. They come up with a way to govern themselves. Pretty smart. Okay, so the Pilgrims did not have a set of laws to guide them in this strange land, so they established some rules of their own before settling. Very intelligent people. They realized they needed that before they even got off the ship. So you gotta give the separatists and the Pilgrims some credit here. They knew what they were doing. Native American help. During their first winter in America, almost half of the Pilgrims died. Illness, hunger, and cold took a terrible toll. In the spring, however, two Native Americans, Squanto and Samoset, befriended the colonists. They taught the Pilgrims to grow corn, beans, and pumpkins, and showed the colonists where to hunt and fish. Without their help, the Pilgrims might not have survived. Squanto and Samoset also helped the Pilgrims make peace with the Wampanoag people, who lived in the area. For a time, the two groups lived in harmony. In the fall of 1621, the Pilgrims included the Wampanoag friends in a feast of Thanksgiving. Now, this looks familiar. So much like in Jamestown, it was the help of Native Americans that kept the settlers alive the first few years. So you got to give the Native Americans credit here. I mean, they really did help out. And notice the sequence of events, right? Pilgrims died of illness and hunger. Squanto and Samoset taught the Pilgrims how to survive, and they celebrated Thanksgiving with their native friends. Now, Thanksgiving as a holiday doesn't appear as an official holiday until, I believe, until Abraham Lincoln's president. But this is the traditional origin of Thanksgiving, right? We all think of this, right? The Pilgrims with the Native Americans sitting down having a turkey dinner, though it probably wasn't turkey. I should point out it was most likely venison, which is deer meat, and fish. Got to be honest, it was probably the two major things. Maybe there was a turkey, maybe, but it was probably the main meal. But this is kind of like the traditional idea of Thanksgiving. When we think of Thanksgiving, this is what we're taught. It goes back to this time where people gave thanks to God for the great things, and basically that is the basis for the modern Thanksgiving today. So interesting that it appears here. Now, the significance of the Plymouth colony, it's incredible. Pilgrims or separatists seek religious freedom and the right to worship without persecution. When they get here, they form the Mayflower Compact, and this is another example of a dedication to representative democratic government in the British colonies, right? Jamestown had this with the House of Burgesses, right? And you see that the Mayflower Compact does the same thing for the Pilgrims. They established good relations with the Native Americans. Will that last? We'll see. Note the similarities and differences with Jamestown. Difference: Jamestown was purely about profit. They were looking to make some moolah, some money. New England's about religious freedom. So those are very two different reasons to establish colonies. I think we'd all agree with that. Similar, both depend upon the graces of Native American groups to survive. Granted, different groups, but still, they both depend upon Native Americans. And both developed the concept of a representative democratic government. That's pretty amazing. That's pretty amazing. Think about how important that is to our democratic ideals today. Gee, I wonder where the origins of democratic ideals began. Right? How about that? So let's wrap things up with our recall, respond, and evaluate, right? The Pilgrims sought religious freedom in America because Henry VIII created his own church. And in England, right? He did that. And not everyone accepted Henry's new church. The separatists wanted their own church and came to America to worship as they pleased. Okay, they settled in Plymouth because their ship got blown off course from Virginia to Cape Cod, where they created their own government based upon the Mayflower Compact. They struggled the first year, but Native Americans helped them survive. Okay, how about new ideas? New ideas about religion and how to worship led the Pilgrims to seek a land where no one would tell them how to worship and change the way the Pilgrims lived. The significance of the Mayflower Compact is that it developed an orderly government for the Pilgrims. It was a key toward a step toward the development of representative democratic government in America. It's one of the first footprints of this idea in America, next to the House of Burgesses in Jamestown. And finally, I don't want to let this go. The struggle to find a place in this world, drove the Pilgrims to seek a new life in a new land. It is important to recognize the achievements of those brave enough to strive and seek new frontiers based upon beliefs, principles, and ideals. I mean, this is pretty amazing. We forget what drives people to do amazing things, and certainly their beliefs drove them to create a new world where they were accepted and that they wouldn't be persecuted by others. And that's a pretty amazing thing. I don't think we can let that go here. We can't go without saying that. So, hey, this is the end of section 1 of this lesson. So just keep in mind, once again, our source information that we're using discovering our past, our history of the United States when we're doing this. In fact, we left off on page 66. Should point that out. This reading is created for educational use only. It's a supplemental tool. Should not be sold or purchased in any manner. It's really for your benefit to help you grow as a student. And I thank you very much, and I'll see you in part 2.